This morning, as we prepare for our message, I just want to begin with this question of how many of you remember, it might have been on the street corner, it might have been downtown. I know there's actually a shop still in the old market, but actually going out and buying vinyl records. Did you know they're making a comeback? Vinyl records are being, new albums are being released in vinyl. In fact, I've also heard that actually some are being released in cassette form, too. Now, I don't think there's any 8 tracks, so some of you need to just let that one go. My brother, he had I don't even remember, I think it was maybe an old LTD, had an 8-track tape player in it, and you'd shove that in the cassette, and you'd advance it. And I thought it was kind of a big deal when you could actually get the cassette, the player in your car, where you could push it and it would go to the next song without having to listen to the whole song. Because before that, you had to listen to everything or try to fast forward and get to the spot where that break would happen and get to the song. Because here's what used to happen is this is a little education for all of you who were born after, say, 1975 probably, that there were times when you had to buy an album that included all of the songs on that album. Now, I remember one of the maybe not one of the first ones, but certainly one that I bought, Chicago 17. And I bought it, of course, for just 1 or 2 of the songs that were on there. Songs like, You're the Inspiration, You're the Meaning in My Life, you know that one? Okay. Or Hard Habit to Break, little Peter Cetera in there, Hard Habit to Break. That was one that I bought that one for. But then I had to listen to songs like Prima Donna, and Remember the Feeling. Anybody remember those 2 songs? No, because you didn't buy the album for those 2 songs. You bought it for that, and you had to suffer through the entire album just to get through that until they had that advance where you could get fast forward to the next album. That was a real advancement in technology, wasn't it? Today, of course, we live in the iTunes generation, where you don't buy albums anymore, you buy a song. So I could just buy You're My Inspiration, or you can just buy this song or that song. You don't have to buy the whole album, and because of that, there is no such thing as like conformity. Everybody is unique and special. My playlist is not going to look anything like your playlist. There are thousands of playlists out there, each one individual to the person, because as an iTunes generation, you create your own experience. We live in a world of individualism. We each have our own playlist. We each have our own ideas. We each do things for our own sake. We don't vote along party lines. They'll vote a policy or an agenda, but not party lines, because it's about them and not the party. There is no more God and country. You don't serve God and country. You serve the motivation is no longer usually the extrinsic, because that's the right thing to do because we are Americans. Now, certainly many, as we see here, one who has chosen to make that sacrifice, as John has, as I have, others who have served in the military have done that. But by and large, it's not this driving force to get behind a cause. How many of you recognize that, well, let me ask this. How many are on bowling leagues? No, because people bowl alone these days. They don't sign up for bowling leagues. Here's one. How many of you are currently in a bridge club? Did you know that Warren Buffett is a big fan of bridge? As I was looking up some bridge clubs, I was wondering if there are any there are actually some in the Omaha area. One meets at the Center Mall, that pristine establishment, and that is actually where Warren Buffett will, on occasion, go and play bridge. Apparently, most of his bridge playing, though, is done online. And that's the nature of our world, even for Warren Buffett, who goes and plays online because it suits his time, his purposes, His agenda, and you don't have to worry about gathering together. So we don't live in this world of gathering together behind a cause. The VFW, the Lions Club, the Elks, the Eagles, all these clubs are continuing to see decreasing attendance and participation because we just aren't joiners anymore. We don't join into a cause. Now, we have seen actually a rise lately in some, particularly since the election, haven't we? We have seen a rise in people getting behind riots and that sort of gathering, right? But then I often wonder how many of them actually know what the cause is for which they fight. There's this increasing trend to do our own thing. There once were front porches on houses. Good news is that there is actually a new development that are seeing builders actually building front porches on houses again. But what used to happen is just about every house in the neighborhood, I mean, if you look out here out west, you see the homes. Most of those homes have backyards with fences because you come in and you enjoy the time with your family in the luxury of your fenced yard. Whereas if you go downtown, say the Dundee area, you see front porches where people used to sit on the front porch and have relationships. We went from this world of relationships to this place of individualism. Now, we think this might be a trending thing, but it's not. It's not uncommon for us to see this individual world that we live in. Another example of the need that we have for relationships, because the truth is although we live in this world of individualism, we also live in this place of desperate thirst and desire for relationships. So much so that there's a new trend. Well, I don't know if it's a trend, but I heard about it on To Tell the Truth. Have you seen that new version of To Tell the Truth? You remember the old version. Now the guy from Blackish, I forget his name, but he's the host of To Tell the Truth. And one of the people who, To Tell the Truth, everybody is allowed to tell a lie except the person that's really the person that they're trying to pick. So one of the people who was telling the lies in that show came out, and we found out what their original or their actual career was rather than the one they were lying about. This woman's career, she was a professional cuddler. Professional cuddler. In other words, what she does is she will, in a non-sexual manner, cuddle with people. In fact, there is a woman in San Antonio that makes $1,600 a week as a professional cuddler. That's more money than I make as a pastor. I'm going to start wearing a sign. Forget the free hugs t-shirts. I'm going to hugs, $5, and I'm going to start supplementing my income. All of a sudden, everybody's shaking my hand when they come in instead of giving me a hug. I don't know what happened, but we live in this world of individualism, and although we're in this individual world, we long for relationship and connection because we were created for community. And this morning we continue in our series in Ecclesiastes, and that's the idea that we're talking about, as you've seen by the title, is that we are created for community. And I can't imagine that the Israelites probably ever had any professional cuddlers. I'm pretty sure that they didn't. But they too were living in a very individualistic world. We've seen that as we've looked at some of the background of those that the author of Ecclesiastes was writing to. They lived in a world of rampant individualism. Like us, it was a time of profitability. Things were going well for them, and they were willing to do whatever it took to step on whomever they needed to step on in order to advance their careers and rise in their success. They had no need or no concern for neighbors. They were willing to step on the neighbors. This whole idea of loving your neighbors had become foreign to them as they turned from the community of Israel to the individual of self and instead pursued their own selfish causes. In fact, they weren't simply trying to keep up with the Joneses. They were trying to get ahead of the Joneses. I guess probably not Joneses. That's not really a Hebrew name. Maybe the Abramsons or the Isaacsons or something like that. I don't know what you would have called them. But they were trying to get ahead of those people beside them. In this culture of individualism, the teacher of Ecclesiastes now continues to raise the questions of life and meaning and purpose. And in this case, the idea of individualism. In Ecclesiastes 4, if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. If you don't have your Bibles, you can open the Pew Bible that's there in front of you. It's page 661. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, beginning at verse 7, it says this, "Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun." Again, this theme that we've looked at again and again and again, the meaninglessness of life under the sun. It's an under the sun experience, remember, the secular perspective. It's a horizontal perspective. He's not talking about a vertical perspective, but this teacher who's run these experiments of life from pleasure and now to relationships is talking about life lived under the sun. And this is his observation in verse 8. "There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. 'For whom am I toiling?' he asked, 'and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business.'" Notice what it says in verse 8. This man was all alone. How did he get there? How did he get to the place that he was all alone? It elaborates there that it says, his eyes were not content with his wealth. Because of his discontentment, he now lived life alone. Now, it does also say that he had neither son nor brother. Now, the question, of course, and we don't have the answer, is had he never had sons or brothers, which is kind of the assumption here. Sons and brothers would have been the next in line for inheritance. So, as a father, when the father passed away, he would pass on his estate to his son. If he had no sons, that would then go to a brother. So the point here is that he has nothing to pass on his estate to when he dies. So he spent his whole life toiling, struggling, working, doing whatever it took to amass a fortune. And because of that, the result that we see in verse 8 is the man was all alone. There was no relationship. There was no family. There was no one around him with who he could connect. If you remember last week that we talked about three positions, three postures of our hands. There were the folded hands. The folded hands are the people who've given up on life and said, "Enough, I just quit. I'm tired of toiling." And they're the ones who just stopped working. They're lazy. They don't do anything to contribute. Their hands are folded in a posture of quitting. But then there were the grabby hands, right? They were doing whatever they could do to grab and to advance. This guy is a man with grabby hands trying to reach to the next level of success at the expense of relationships. He wanted more. He desired more. He worked so that he could have more, but at the expense of relationships. And as the great theologians, the Beatles would say, "Money can't buy me love," right? I know, you're all singing that in your head right now, aren't you? Can't buy me love. Now, skip down a few verses. Let's skip down to verse 13. In verse 13, it says that better a poor but wise youth. So now we're seeing a different scenario. We see the rich miser who had no relationships. Now we see a different group of people, a poor but wise youth. So it's better to be a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So here there's this picture of another man, actually a picture of at least two men. Some have considered that it might be three. I think that the better picture here is two men. So there's two men. Actually, there's the youth and the king. So here's this youth and here's the king. And what distinguishes the two is the king is foolish and the youth is the wise one in this situation. Of course, as the Israelites were reading this was against what would be the normal wisdom teaching, because what we expect to see is there's this wise old man who's teaching the youth his ways and growing it, but that's the whole point. There was this foolish king and this wise youth, and so the people would be drawn, and their attention would be drawn to this. And the king's foolishness is singled out here, and you look at it and you're asking, what is going on? He doesn't heed any warning. So he is a king, a leader who doesn't listen to the instruction of anybody else because he knows best. It's a king that fails to heed the counsel of others, like this previous man that we talked about in the beginning of this passage, he's also alone. Not because people aren't willing to talk to him, but because he's not willing to listen to them. So the experience that he has is the same as the first. Neither one is going through life with others. The teacher of Ecclesiastes seeks to further illustrate the nature of the youth as the one who might have come from the prison and the kingship. So he describes him as such, and I imagine that those who are reading this probably get a picture of Joseph in their mind, who went from prison to the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And though it's probably not that man specifically to which he's alluding to, they have this idea, they can get a grasp of the experience that he experienced. And notice in verse 15, the teacher is saying, I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. Now, previously in Ecclesiastes chapter 1:4, remember it said that generations go and generations come. Generations go and generations come. It's this picture of being replaced. And so this king now is replaced. But it also says that the future for this new young king is that he too will be replaced. Because people come, and generations go. So while there are a lot of people who are coming around this king, again, remember we've talked about two experiences. Two of them are very alone. One because he doesn't listen, the other one because he has no relationships. This third king, this third person, a second king, now is in this place where he's surrounded by people. But these relationships, you see, are very shallow. How do I know they're shallow? Because it says it wasn't long before they began to dislike what that king had to offer, right? What does it say? In verse, let me look here. They followed the king and the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. Do you got that? So there's no end. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. They were fickle friends. They followed as long as it suited their purpose. It's what we call consumerism, right? I'll follow you as long as there's something in it for me. How many of us have relationships like that? That will follow someone as long as there's something in it for me. So we see a man with no relationships. We see a man who has relationships, but he doesn't listen to any of them, so he fails to collaborate. And we see a youth surrounded by shallow consumeristic relationships. So the conclusion of the matter, as has been common refrain from the teacher, is that this too is meaningless. What's the point? It's like a vapor. Now, I know that you're all very astute learners out there, so I know that you recognize that we skipped verses 9 through 12, didn't we? Well, there's a reason for that, and the reason is this, is in Hebrew literature, they'll use different teaching techniques of which we're not commonly accustomed to, and this is a teaching technique called a chiasm, which is actually a Greek letter, like the letter X, right? And so the point is you've got this big idea at top, you got this big idea down here at the bottom that all point to the singular idea of the passage right here in the middle. So the middle is the point of the passage. And so he's bringing us to this place. It's like a truth sandwich. You've got the piece of bread up here, you got the piece of bread down here, and right here in the middle is the meat. You track it. See, we understand that because we're talking bacon now, so we're good. So we're talking, unless you don't like BLTs, which some of us don't. I'm sure you do. I digress. So it's the meat of the argument. And so here's the meat of the argument in verses 9 through 12. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Verse 11, also if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And verse 12, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So you see, the bread is dysfunctional relationships. The meat is healthy relationships. So what do healthy relationships look like? In these verses, we see 4 benefits of functional relationships. Here are those 4 benefits. There's synergy, assistance, comfort, and defense. Let's consider these, all right? First of all, synergy. Verse 9, what did it say? 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. We've seen this idea of return previously in the book of Ecclesiastes because, again, it was talking to a people who were looking for a good return on investment, a good ROI. And so here's the return on investment. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. It's this idea of synergy. In contrast to the solitary life of the lonely miser, we see here the reward that comes from relationships. Now, a word of warning, what this verse isn't saying is that we should use people for our personal gain. It's not saying find somebody just so you can find success. It's talking about mutually affirming relationships. It's not creating strategic allies simply to advance your agenda. Greed is what leads us to selfishness and oppression. We talked about that last week. Because of our greed, we see oppression and injustice. But when relationships are our objective instead of our strategy for advancement, then coincidentally, you have a good return. The return isn't our goal, the relationships are our goal. Let me illustrate. My grandpa was a fond fan of straight cornrows. He took a great deal of pride in having the straightest cornrows in all of Washington County. Now, in time, of course, I've discovered that in the Plain States at least, there is this thing that nobody actually will tell you if your cornrows are crooked. They will tell all the neighbors, but they'll never tell you. And there's a reason that they won't tell you is because sometime, having come out of an agrarian culture, there might have been a time when you needed help raising a barn, or you needed help getting the cattle in, or you needed help with something. So people would be nice because there was something that they needed from you later on down the road. So we don't tell people the rows are crooked. Now, I'm not suggesting that we just become mean and rude people and say, those are the crookedest rows I've ever seen. That's not what I'm suggesting, but what I am suggesting is that we have authentic relationships where we can be honest with other people. Now, I'm not talking about just the mean type of people like the woman who said, Pastor, you need to change your voice, it hurts my ears. Somebody actually told the pastor that. Fortunately, it wasn't me. Or another one who told their pastor, here's $5, go buy a new joke book. That was actually my wife telling me. What I am suggesting is that we're not just being rude, but that we're being authentic. Because a lot of times we'll put on the nice, but we don't ever get to the authentic. And sometimes relationships can be very hard because you have to push through the pseudo relationships, the nice piece, like, oh, the weather's beautiful, things are great, things are grand. You have to move past that niceness into a little bit of conflict sometimes. And that conflict, in the end, you have a choice. Do you return back to the pseudo-niceness where you're pretending you like each other, or do you push through to the other side where you have authentic relationships? We often settle for less than the best. We often settle for that pseudo-relationship where we're willing just to live in the happiness of the nice weather and the good Cornhusker game, but we never push through to past a little conflict into the place where authentic relationships happen, and that happens after you've pushed through rather than retreating back to those moments of just fake. So let's move past the fake. Listen to Jesus' words in Luke chapter 6. Give to anyone who asks you, and if everyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. How many of you are kind to the ungrateful? You ungrateful little snot. That's usually how I would never respond like that, of course. Okay, maybe. But that's what Jesus says, is we're giving even when there's no return on the investment. Our focus is not the return. Our focus is the relationship. Don't focus on the return. Focus on the relationship. Don't focus on what you can get out of somebody else. Focus on what the relationship in and of itself means. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. Life is easier when you have friends. The second benefit of relationships is assistance. In verse 10, what does it say? It says, if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity, Mr. T comes out every time I read that, but pity the fool. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Derek Redmond, maybe you've heard of him. Derek Redmond was an Olympian. He was at the peak of his track career in 1992 when he lined up for the 400-meter semifinal at the Barcelona Olympics. Prior to that, in his rising up through the ranks, he had easily won the first two rounds without even breaking a sweat. He had posted the fastest time in the first round heats. Now in the 400-meter semifinal, just as he gets to stride, he hears a popping sound. He tries to take a few more steps, but then the pain just surges through his body. He's pulled a hamstring. He falls to the turf. He gets up and he hobbles along, trying to get a little bit further, and he says, he has the determination to finish the race. The medics are coming along trying, he has this vision in his head that somehow, I can still catch him, but his hamstring is shattered, torn apart to pieces. And then he hears this voice with a hand on his back, Derek, it's me, you don't need to do this. It's the voice of his father, it's Derek's dad. Derek replies, Dad, I want to finish. I want to get to the semifinal. His dad replies, we started this thing together. Let's finish it. His dad was able to stop him from trying to run because he continued to try to run, but he just picked him up, put an arm around him, and kept repeating these words, you're a champion. You've got nothing to prove. You're a champion. You've got nothing to prove. And they continued to walk until they got past the finish line. Of course, they didn't win the race, but they did finish the race. If one falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls down and has no one to help them up. Who are those people that help you up? Who are the ones that are there when you fall? Who are the ones that, when you stumble, are willing to come by your side? Now, I'm no Olympian. I know that surprises some of you. I have done some running, I've done some half marathons, but here's a truth. I've never, ever once trained alone. Okay, there were times that I might have to do a run on my own because my running partner maybe wasn't available that day, but there was always someone who was committed to run the races that I was running. And because I knew there was someone who was running with me, who was willing to run the race with me, that I would get up and I'd get out of bed and I would go and I would run the race. I would do the training. I would do what it would take. I would keep my feet moving one in front of the other until finally I would get to that place where my feet got across the finish line. As a young Christian, there were many times that I stumbled. Truth is, I still stumble today, but I have good relationships. My friend Patrick Drury, he's a pastor in Minnesota. He and I touch base on a regular basis to say, how's your walk? How's your life? How are you doing? My other friend David, who's walked with me through many of the trials in my life and many of those low points in my life, many of the times when I've stumbled, has picked me up and he's carried me along, continued to run the race with me. Not just saying, hey, not just brushing off the sin. He's approaching the sin and correcting it and sharpening me, helping me to get past it the next time. You see, friends help us to run the race and get across the finish line. We need those kinds of friends. The third benefit is this: comfort. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 11, it says, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Here's an interesting fact. Emperor penguins, the emperor, they're the taller of the family, will huddle together in the Antarctic to keep warm. And there's this cool YouTube video out there that they did a time-lapse thing, and they see it just kind of moves in waves, and what actually happens is they're rotating around so that there's an equal share of time for the penguins who are on the outside and when they have an opportunity to move in. So they huddle up and they move around and they keep each other warm. Now, I've long been under the belief that it's true that in the event of hypothermia, the best thing that you can do is to take off all of your wet clothes, climb into the sleeping bag with someone, and share body heat with the other person to help that. Now, of course, I can find anything in the internet to prove my thought, but what I'm finding mostly is that's not true. It does not help people recover from hypothermia, but what it does do is help prevent it. When we share body heat, there are pictures of Navy SEALs who, in the midst of their water training, are huddled together, keeping warm. As strong and as mighty as they are, they realize that they need each other and each other's body heat to bring them comfort in the midst of this agonizing coldness that they're experiencing. We all need people to come around us in close proximity, to not just in this arm's length away, but in close proximity to bring us comfort when things are painful. In Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24, it says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." We need friends who are there when we need them. We need reliable friends who are there even when the conditions are tough. Fair weather friends are those who are there when times are good, but when things are bad, you can almost forget about it, right? Closer than a brother friends accept you for who you are. Even in the midst of mess, we all know that there are times when lives are messy, right? Even in the midst of that mess, those are the people who are there and sticking close by your side. It's a common fear among people, all of us, I think, have experienced. This common fear among all of us is the fear of being exposed. What if they knew the real me? What if they knew the real you? Would they still like you if they knew that you thought this way, behaved this way, did this way? We need friends who are willing to stick with us even when they see the ugly side of us. But we're often afraid that people will bail, that they'll walk out, that they'll leave us abandoned and alone. We need people who will comfort us and accept us no matter what. The fourth benefit of friends is defense. In verse 12 it says, "Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken." I came across this motorcycle proverb this week. Everybody that's riding with you ain't riding for you. Let the gas run out and see who helps you push. In 1 Samuel 20, we read about Jonathan and David, and I'm sure this story is familiar to many of you. The relationship, this beautiful relationship between Jonathan and David, who would be king. But at the time, Jonathan's father, Saul, he was king at the moment. And Saul was living in rebellion against God, and so God had already revealed that the throne would be taken away from him, and this throne would be passed on to David. And so God's man, David, and Jonathan were great friends, but there was this concern that David had that Saul was out to kill him, which in fact he was, but Jonathan, because he had this relationship with his dad, failed to see that there was this animosity between the two. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, David explains to Jonathan that Saul is out to kill him, and they devise this plan. So they hatch this plan, that the plan is for Jonathan to talk to Saul to find out where he really is. Then they would go out into this open field, and Jonathan would shoot 3 arrows. He would send someone to recover those arrows, and if he said to him, "Look, the arrows are beyond you," that was the sign that indeed Saul was willing to kill him. But you understand again that Jonathan is the king's son. And so there's this relationship that he has between the two of them, but is there this intimacy between these two men that is willing to even risk the relationship with his family in the pursuit of the right thing, of God's call on his life? Well, the response was just that. The arrows are beyond you, which was a sign that indeed Saul was in pursuit to kill David. And at the end of chapter 20, Jonathan says to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord." the value of that relationship is the type of relationship that we all long for, the one that is willing to be there for us and to help us and to provide us the assistance and the care and the love and the concern, all those things that we've talked about. Do you have friends who have your back? Who are the friends that have your back? Who are the friends that are there? The friends that will get your back even when your back is against the wall. Who are the friends that will push your motorcycle when it runs out of gas? So this morning we've talked about 4 different types of friends, the get the work done friends. Those are the friends that are there when you need a hand. We've talked about the carry them to the finish line friends. Those are the friends who are there to help you even when you're stumbling, even when you can't get up and walk to the finish line alone. They get you there. We've talked about the closer than a brother friends. Those are the friends that are willing to huddle up with you. Life on life, close proximity, even when it's uncomfortable, that you might find comfort. And then there's the got your back friends. Those are the friends that are there for you even when your back is against the wall. You know, I'm thankful for my good friends that I've had over the years and the good friends that we're making now. The kinds of friends that are there for me when I need them. My friend David, who I spoke of earlier, for over nearly 30 years now, we've been great friends. And we've seen good times, we've seen bad times. He picks me up when I fall, I pick him up, I encourage him. When we're having confusion, trying to understand how to raise our kids, we're there to talk to each other. When we're learning how to be better husbands, we're there to talk with each other. He's got my back. I know he always has my back. I know he's always there to run the race with me. And I'm sure you have friends like this too. We all want friends like that. And I hope you have those kind of friends. Kind of friends that lend a hand even when no one else is willing to. The kind that are willing to help you finish the race. The kind that are willing to look past the awkward and embrace you anyway. This in the last week or so, I received a phone call. I received a call from someone asking for benevolence. Again, we took a benevolence offering just a little bit earlier. And the guy called and he said, we're passing through town. We've been out sharing gospel tracts with people in 36 states, but our car broke down. It's 3 a.m. this morning, and we're just wondering if you have any traveler's aid, anything that can help us. My alternator is gone. I need a new battery. I need a new serpentine belt. I just need some money to help do this. And I said, okay, well, we get a number of phone calls. So is there an employee that, someone I can call to give me a reference to make sure that you are who you say you are? And he said, well, I'm self-employed. I'm in construction. I don't have a reference. I don't have an employer or employee or employer. I always get those mixed up. And then I said, well, what about a church? Do you have a church home? Oh, yeah, we have a church home, but we haven't gone there for years. We watch church online on the internet. We're part of an internet church out of Georgia or somewhere. I said, so what you're saying is there's nobody in that church who would know who you are, is there? No, we just worship in our living room. Just me and my family. And it was a real reality check for me because what it shows me is where are relationships happening for this guy? He was a man who was all alone in a time of need. And so many people in our world go through this life. And it just affirmed the reality of how important it is to gather together as a body of believers and how important it is for us to have those kind of relationships with everybody around us that we've talked about this morning. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25, we read it earlier this morning. It says, let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encourage one another. Let us not forsake meeting together. It's not because we want the pews to be filled. We do want them to be filled, but that's not the reason. Why do we want them to be filled? Because it's about relationships. Relationships are so important. We need friends. We need the get the work done friends. We need the carry them to the finish line friends. We need the closer than a brother friends. We need the got your back friends. And we need to be those kinds of friends to other people, to one another. The Bible is filled with the one another's, encourage one another, love one another, build one another's up. Because the Bible recognizes the importance of relationships. This series has been about legacy. This week, let me encourage you to not go through life alone. One of the ways that we have to help one another connect in the type of relationships that we're talking about, it happens to an extent here, but it really happens at an even deeper level in the context of our small groups, our fellowship groups, our journey groups. If you're not currently connected to a journey group, let me encourage you to get plugged into one of those as soon as possible. They're listed in the bulletin, on the calendar. There's a number of places. I've got one that meets tonight. If you're interested, let me know. We'll tell you where it's at. There is great value to be had in small groups. And referring back to Proverbs, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. That person is Jesus Christ. If you haven't invited Christ into your life, let me encourage you to do that today. Will you pray with me? Lord, thank you for this body of believers called the church, specifically our Saviour's Baptist Church. I pray, Lord, that we would be the type of place where these relationships are true. That not just something we talk about, but something we strive for. That we would be the type of friends who help get the work done. That we would be the type of friends that carry others to the finish line. That we would be the type of friends that are closer than brothers. That we would be the type of friends that have others' bags. I pray, Lord, for those who have not yet connected to a small group, that they would take a next step and find a place to plug in. I pray for those who have never met Jesus, that they would take the next step and become part of the family of God. Lord, I thank you for the truth of your word and the power of the testimony of your word that tells us the value of friendships. And as I often tell my kids, you got to be a friend to make a friend. Help us to be the kind of friends we've talked about today, that we might make other friends. Lord, we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.